Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies. Protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week, Signal Sciences' next-gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Hi everyone, this is Paul Asadoorian with Security Weekly. I'm here at RSA Conference 2019 with Jeff Hudson, the CEO of Venafi. Jeff, welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here. Now, we were just kind of briefly discussing at a very high level machine identities. And for our audience, what are machine identities?
So let me give you some context. There are two actors on a network, people and machines. And people, to identify themselves and to get access to machines, use usernames and passwords. Then
Unfortunately,
machines,
right?
Yeah, well, but that's what we've got.
Absolutely.
But then the machines have to talk to one another. But they don't use usernames and passwords, they use machine identities. And we know that today, Gartner says we're spending about $10 billion a year worldwide to protect human identities, but just starting to protect machine identities, just starting to really even understand it. The number of machines is going through the roof, because in cloud workloads and containers and Internet of Things and everywhere, the number of machines is accelerating. And bad guys like to steal identities, machine or human, and use them in their attacks. And so what we have done is created the technology that's used by 350 of the world's largest and most advanced thinkers who are driving digital transformation to protect their machine identities from being stolen and used in attacks.
I feel like it's right out of almost like a Marvel movie where my superpower is I can assume a person's identity or a machine's identity, and that's what many attackers are doing with their attacks, is basically assuming that identity and then exploiting trust. Correct?
Right. Yeah, exactly. What you do is it's one of the best known attack vectors is you steal somebody's identity and then you get their trust naturally if you use their identity. So if somebody's an employee at a very large bank and they steal somebody's ID, they can get in and do all kinds of things in the bank. Same thing with machines. But we don't see that. You see, we see usernames and passwords because we use them every day. But if everybody's just assuming it's all taken care of, but it's not.
Right.
And the way we know that is one simple little way to diagnose that. Companies around the world all the time are having certificates expire, and certificates of machine identity type, which means they're not keeping track of them.
Right.
And we've seen some huge ones recently. We saw Equifax. We know what that led to. And this, a certificate expiring led to the Equifax breach. We saw with the Ericsson switches that cell phones in Japan, about 70% of the cell phones in Japan didn't work for 6 hours because of an expired certificate. So
yeah, they're hard to find, especially when they're buried on a machine somewhere, right? And they're easy to forget about.
Very easy to forget about. And today most people say, well, I've got spreadsheets or I've got homegrown database or something like that. But the speed at which these things are now moving around, it just boggles the mind. I
feel like long ago when I was a pen tester working with Unix systems, we would exploit the trust in the R services, right? Like R shell and things like that. But that's essentially been carried forward over the years, where machines trust each other in a similar sense. We may use certificates today, but there's still a trust between those systems.
Certificates, we use keys, and it applies to servers, laptops, it applies to cloud workloads, it applies to algorithms, it applies to APIs. There's API keys. If you attach to an API, how do you know if you trust the API?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting. And even
we actually had
algorithms like blockchain,
yeah,
they use these things called machine identities.
Speaking here at RSA, I'll talk about an incident that we had where in our CI/CD process, right, the Jenkins server has to talk to the Docker server, and they have to trust each other to send commands and execute the process. And if you don't put authentication behind that, an attacker will exploit that. Like, hey, that's open now because you didn't put any authentication between the machines.
Right.
Or if it was, they could have exploited it. And I feel like there's a lot more of that today because of the way we deploy modern applications.
Well, it's exploded. And exactly right. So you said CI/CD pipelines, and the way they're supposed to work is at some step along the way, they need to get an identity for the container or for the virtual machine.
Sure.
And so where do they go to? Well, a lot of times developers will set up their own little CA on their laptop to take care of this. And now you've got all these places creating these identification badges to give access to a network, and there's no policy control, there's no control, there's no visibility. It's just amazing what we find when we go into these organizations and they say, we think we got a problem. Spend a week with them and say, here's your problem, and they go, oh my God, I didn't realize it was like this.
Right. So how does Venafi help with this particular problem? Is it is it an agent? Is it a network sniffing, an API hook, or?
So the problem at the highest level is that people don't have visibility. And we see it all the time. If something's going to expire, it's because you didn't know it was going to expire. You didn't have visibility. And we generally find that corporations say they have so many thousands of machine identities, and they have 10 times that. They just don't have visibility. So how do you protect something you don't have visibility on? How do you protect against it unless you have visibility on it? So the first thing is visibility. So we've very sophisticated techniques for getting visibility inside and outside of an organization, because some research we released today, and I don't know if you saw it, and it was research done by Georgia State University. It was the evidence-based cybersecurity research part of the School of Engineering, and they combined with University of Surrey, and they came up. They went into the dark web, they went into the deep web, and they found literally thousands and thousands of machine identities for sale. Not only machine identities packaged up with fake companies, machine identities packaged up to create places on the internet that people would potentially go to thinking they're going to a bank and they're going to an attacker's website.
And by machine identity, largely you're looking at SSL certificates of some kind.
SSL and TLS,
Yep.
SSH keys,
Okay.
API keys, code signing certificates. So one of the really interesting things that came out of the research was a package for sale that had a fake company, it had a company address, it had a DUNS number, all this is about creating a company, certificates, code signing certificates that went with it, and this is a very well-known brand of a company. This is for sale on the dark web. So the bad guys get this. I think sometimes the bad guys get this more than the good guys.
And they can assume that identity, and it's very valid.
Stand up with it. It's very valid. It's a certificate that, for all intents and purposes, it's valid, but it looks like it belongs to somebody it doesn't belong to. And so it's a way to steal an identity. So anyway, the first thing is visibility.
Yep.
And so we have very sophisticated ways for doing that inside and out. Second is intelligence, because just because you see it, you don't know what it means. Does it conform to policy? Do we know where it came from? How long has it been there? What's it associated with? What does it have access to? All these kinds of things you need to know in an access management system. What's it mean? And then the third thing, and probably the most important, is we automate the heck out of everything, because the systems from 5 years ago worked at the speed of 5 years ago. The number of machine identities is 1,000 times greater, and the speed is 1,000,000 times greater. You'd have to hire 100 more people in most companies to deal with it in the old way. So you
automate the remediation.
We automate the remediation.
Oh, I'm so happy that a lot of people I talk to are saying this when you've described the problem, the solution,
And then they stop.
and then and then it's like, well, you got to fix it. But now, folks like you are saying, we're helping you automate the remediation. That is so critical today. We can't get around that because of the scale of we're deploying things today.
So if you think of a corporation that needs to know where all the people are and what their identities are, they also need to know the machines and the identities of the machines. And that means these machines are everywhere, and they're different kinds, and they touch everything, and machine identities are everywhere. So we created an investment vehicle we call the Machine Identity Protection Development Fund, and we put $12.5 million into it. And what we're doing is we're paying people or investing in companies to build connections back into the Venafi platform, because that's what our customers need. Because as they bring on like HashiCorp or Kubernetes, or you mentioned Jenkins and Kafka and all these tool sets, or you bring on Azure or AWS or the Google Cloud, there's interfaces that are needed, and these all need to be developed. So we're paying people to do it. We're building the ecosystem, and I don't think anybody else has even conceptualized doing this.
Yeah, I love it because having worked with these various components, right, they all need to have some level of trust with each other. And if you shortcut that process, as you've given examples already, really bad things can happen, right? Really if you don't pay attention to it, and having the facility to be able to trust that this server trusts that server and this app trusts this app, that is so important today, and it really allows you to take your systems and security to the next level. If not, your whole foundation is crumbling beneath you.
You've heard of zero trust.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, so zero trust means it's sort of the perimeter's gone away, so you can't trust anything because there's nothing inside or outside anymore. So what's that really mean? That means you have to use something to decide on, does this belong to me or not? Should I try and protect it or protect against it? Becomes identity. And so machine identity is actually the foundation of zero trust. And if you don't protect those identities, you can't set up a zero trust environment. So people are just starting to understand this. I mean, the world's changing so fast, and this thing called machine identity and protecting them is just, it's a new concept to a whole lot of people. And we're way out in front, and that's what we do, is we educate people on this.
And you've got a great research team, and you've done some research on the dark web. How prevalent are machine identities, and what's the going rate on the dark web?
As I mentioned earlier, they're everywhere. I mean, there's thousands of them for sale on the dark web, and they are probably 100 times more valuable than a human identity.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we've found packages bundled with services on how you use it to attack somebody for up to $2,500 per identity.
Wow. Yeah, that's
and what's that tell you? That tells you they are very valuable, and they're being used, and it's just invisible to us. So we're really doing our best to try and protect the world, because, and this is something most people don't think about, as a species, we're facing something that we've never faced before, which is the fact that machines, this year, machines are going to be making real-time life and death decisions about humans. And not on the battlefield in Syria, but I'm talking about in the streets of San Francisco and New York. Imagine a self-driving car going down a road, and a truck pulls out in front of it. Is it going to hit the truck, or is it going to potentially kill the people in the car, or is it going to swerve and kill people on the sidewalk? It's a machine driving that car. It's a piece of code. And machine's not going to check back with anybody. It's not going to ask a human. It's going to make a real-time decision on who lives and dies. How important is it that we have an identity that we trust and is protected on that? Because if you're a bad guy, you want to shut down any city in the world, do 3 of those things at the same time, the whole city shuts down.
Right.
And so identity, protecting the identity to make sure that the piece of software that's driving that car is the one that's supposed to be there, it's like critically important. We're at just a juncture, and this is, most people don't understand, even people, practitioners here at RSA, they don't get this. Machines are becoming so critically important, we must identify them.
It's scary when I think of it in the context of Skynet, and how machines interact in science fiction, but what you're describing is very much a reality of today, of the dangers that could happen if we don't get a handle on the security and the trust and verification of what's happening with the machine.
And identity is fundamental to that. How do you trust something unless you can identify it? And if that identity is a fake identity, how can you build trust? You can't. So we need some belief, and we need something to prove that we can trust these identities. And that's the business we're in, is protecting machine identities. So this whole thing we've built, in fact, digital transformation's changing the world, right? We just had an example of that, self-driving cars. There's only one threat to it. It's not Moore's Law, it's not lack of 5G, it's not bigger screens, it's not 8K displays or lack thereof. It's, can we secure this thing we've built?
It's an excellent point. That technology is being held back because of security, which is tied to health and public safety, right?
Right, and then you take one step further and you think about privacy. And we're in, I call it, and somebody else has coined this phrase, surveillance capitalism. where people make money. Technology in and of itself is not bad, but when it's used to surveil every single step that somebody takes, to be able to predict what they're going to do and then sell that to somebody to monetize somebody's future actions. You know, you can go to places in this country and you can Google things and you won't even find mention of some technology issues because you're in Kansas and nobody cares in Kansas. And it's just fascinating the way perception can get molded and sold. And so I think privacy is a huge deal. And you think about machine identities, one of the things they do is they guarantee privacy of transmission from the originator to the application or the server and back again. They encrypt that. And so somebody can take over those identities. Not only do they assume the identity that's trusted, but now they can communicate in private or they can surveil. And it's just, most people don't understand it, but it's fundamental.
Very cool. Well, Jeff, thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.
Welcome, everyone. We are at RSA 2019. It's been so much fun talking with folks here. And, of course, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk to my good friend, JP. He's the CTO of Onapsis. JP, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's good to see you again.
Likewise, yeah.
Yeah, glad you come here and talk about. Now, you're giving a talk here at RSA.
Yeah.
And so what's the topic of this talk?
Breaches to ERP applications.
Wait, I thought those don't happen. No one talks about those. I don't see those covered in the...
Yeah, you're right. Actually, it doesn't happen, yeah.
Is that one of the things that I feel must frustrate you, is the kind of level of press when certain other technologies... Like, I see stories where they're like, oh, they can hack into a container ship and flip it over. And then if you really dig down, I see the research from, you know, the fine folks at Onapsis, and I'm like, there's breaches in ERP systems. To me, that's way more impactful to society, to my daily life when I think about who uses ERP, right?
Absolutely.
Than someone who theoretically could hack into maybe a container ship or, you know, a toaster or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and not only it's possible to do that type of compromises to ERP applications, which we have been talking for a long time already.
Oh, yeah. You were doing training at other conferences like Black Hat for many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And doing presentations and webcasts and really raising awareness. But lately we shifted towards speaking about what's actually happening. Because it's not only that it's possible, but it's really happening on multiple different levels. And to your point, we don't hear about it, right? Because typically organizations prefer to keep that really like low profile. And even if when you hear about a breach, you ask yourself, hey, what was stolen? Was it customer data? Was it IP? Was it? And if you think about it, where is that ultimately stored? It's in an ERP application, right?
Absolutely.
So a lot of those connections are typically not out there, but it happens. And we are typically pulled into organizations when they have issues with some of those ERP applications to do forensics investigations, incident response, and really provide visibility into what happened afterwards.
Are these targeted attacks, in your opinion?
I think there is a little bit of everything. What we have seen as an uptake on the last year is definitely an interest from state-sponsored and really building those capabilities around targeting ERP applications, because they know that there is some level of low-hanging fruit there, because organizations simply are not doing the basic security hygiene in those ERP applications, but also because they understand that that's where the data is, right? And we have seen many examples of targeted attacks exfiltrating financial reports, really performing attacks at the business level, and weaponizing that with a financial outcome, right?
And is it more of a nation-state attack? Because I feel like if I'm going to say I want to go attack an ERP system and I want to test it, right? Like with Microsoft Windows or Linux or a lot of open source, I can just go get them. I can test around. I can practice, develop my exploit. Is it nation-state because they can go purchase those systems or find those systems maybe on the dark web? I'm sure it happens too, but is that is that why it's probably more of a nation state attack in some cases?
There is a component of really like being able to get access to the technology itself, and you need some resources to that level. But we have seen from last year a report really working with Digital Shadows on understanding what's happening out there. We have seen entire blog posts speaking about how to hack SAP applications, really like people asking for exploits specific of ERP technology
on the dark web.
On open, deep, and dark web. So that was really eye-opener and definitely a huge milestone, which also drove another CERT alert, like the one in 2016. So it's definitely gaining momentum and attention from organizations. I think still we are a little bit away from really addressing the problem as it should be from these big corporations.
At a high level, JP, is it more of a smash and grab, or is it more of a stealthy attack? And to put that in a more technical manner, am I just executing an exploit, getting the database, pulling my data out, or inside of an ERP system, am I developing something that gives me persistence to constantly monitor, or is it kind of a mixture?
Actually, it's a mixture. We have seen like hacktivists really exploiting these applications because they can do it, and really going and putting one step on the organization. But also we have seen...
And probably wanted to release those financial information to do reputational damage or make a point as a hacktivist with that data.
And it's not really like so much of an advanced attack. It's something like really on that level. But then we have seen some threat actors that are closer to like these APTs and nation states that are really like getting a foot into the ERP application and then deploying malware and moving laterally and doing all that stuff that they do. They know how to do on the operating system level and on those different layers. They are doing that also on the ERP layer as well.
Interesting. So they're doing it on both the OS and the ERP layer.
And
now on the operating system layer, do similar protections exist like you would for other servers, or is it kind of less because it's such a mission critical application and performance is paramount? Like, do they have an easier time getting in the OS layer?
They typically have an easier time getting into the application layer because of how organizations simply operate. And it really depends on the organization what are the additional controls that they put on the OS and the database. Sometimes they have nothing. Sometimes they have the same controls that they have for all the other databases, also in the ERP. What we don't see in many organizations is something at the application level itself, right? That's where we go and help them.
Right. And so now, do you have software that can live inside of the ERP system and monitor that today?
Yeah.
Is that, I guess what we talked about maybe last time too, right? Is you have some type of, I don't want to say agent because I think it's just too broad of a term, right? But you can monitor from within the ERP system.
Exactly. We have a tight integration into the ERP ecosystem that we can not only perform, of course, vulnerability assessment, compliance, configuration checks, patches, but also perform continuous monitoring. And some of the latest capabilities that we have are around preventing some of those risks, right? When someone wants to introduce an additional risk into the ERP landscape, we can block that and prevent that from...
That can be a legitimate user or an attacker?
Correct. If it's a legitimate user, he has a workflow for approvals and for really like going through that change. I mean, the organization could still accept that risk.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
And if it's like an attacker,
sending an exploit, we can
prevent that.
Right. That's awesome. How has that been received by your customers?
I mean, they are all super happy. It had a great reception, just because telling them they have a lot of problems is not a solution by itself.
And tell them they need to apply patches. I mean, I even see it in some of the small things I work with. Like, you got to upgrade something. It can go wrong in any type of technology applying an update. And then you put that on an ERP system that's mission critical. We've had these discussions before. It's very hard to do an update on those systems. There's a lot of variables.
Yeah, it's mission critical, compliant to many regulations, heavily customized, super complex. So a lot of different
not easy to have two of them either. To be like, oh yeah, we're just going to try it on the back. Like that doesn't work in this event, right? Unless you got a lot of money to buy two of them. But most people don't do that, right? They've got one because it's such a large system and so complex.
Correct, and that's why we started investing on the solution side, right? Automation and prevention capabilities, so they can stop the bleeding and prevent additional risks, but also we help them automate the solution of their existing risks. So it's definitely been well received.
Absolutely. So there were 2 CERT alerts. You mentioned one in 2016 for ERP applications. There was one more recently, correct? Yeah.
That was last year. The first one in 2016 was because we worked with the DHS providing information about a specific vulnerability that was being exploited on internet-facing portals. And then in 2018, after an extensive research that we did with
Digital Shadows, right? Yeah.
We found even additional evidence of campaigns targeting specific industries and specific organizations, which also incorporate ERP components as part of those campaigns. So
that's awesome. I've had this discussion with Alex Horan before, but it was a few years ago since we had this conversation. When I look at the things that we can do with cloud and serverless and containers and how that can help solve the problem of updates being much better, even with just one system, the ability to switch back and forth and go, oh, that update didn't work, roll back, even that just that base functionality. Have you seen a migration to the cloud in ERP applications?
Okay, do you have like 2 hours?
Yeah.
let me summarize it. Yes, absolutely. So organizations are migrating to the cloud. What we see is especially in the ERP applications or the business critical applications, they go first to an infrastructure as a service play, where they work with Azure, GCP, AWS, SAP, Oracle, all those big IBM, like all those big cloud providers to run their existing technology, upgrade that, and put it in the cloud. That works very well for big organizations. Also, we are seeing a lot of cloud SaaS adoption. The trade-off there is that when it's SaaS, you have less of a capability to customize it. It's
totally
more
agree.
restricted.
Yep.
So you can adopt SaaS specifically when you can adopt standard processes and things that you don't need to change and customize heavily. For all that.
That's not everyone, though, because most people heavily customize these systems.
Especially the big enterprise sector. So for the mid-market and the very standard processes, SaaS is a good option.
That's good, yeah.
On the other end, for big organizations and really heavily customized business processes, you need to go to other model.
Most of this software does run on Windows, correct?
Correct. It runs on Windows. However, most a common platform would be Unix, Linux to support ERPs.
Okay. Yeah, so cloud is a great migration. If it's on the Windows side, they could go to Azure in Microsoft Cloud as well, right?
Even if it's not running on Windows, we still see a lot of Azure.
Yeah, sure, because they support Linux. Actually, they were like 40-something% Linux in the Azure cloud. That's good. I think that'll help it. So tell me about digital transformation. What does that mean? When I think of bigger ERP systems too, I think about like those big printers that like print out like big reports and stuff back in the day. Does that mean I can just get it on my phone now instead of waiting for a big, like ribbon? What are those big printers, right?
Yeah. So digital transformation can mean so many things for each one of us. Can mean a different thing. Organizations typically, that's a push for adopting the latest technology from the vendors and really adopt IoT, blockchain, machine learning, user experience, cloud, all in-memory technologies to be able to have a better business outcome, right? Like be able to reach out to more customers, be able to gain efficiencies in some processes. So in the ERP or business critical applications, we see a lot of that, adopting the latest technology from SAP and Oracle. security has been historically has been a blocker on that innovation adoption. We are seeing this not only the opposite, but also an enabler, and really reducing a lot of that time and cost of adoption, being positioned at the beginning and really as part of the key business objectives. It's been working very well for organizations.
It's awesome. In terms of auditing, it's interesting. We were actually talking last night about auditing and compliance and how that relates to security and how that's a different kind of audience. And I'm sure in ERP systems especially, the audit process is very important. I feel like they borrowed a page from mainframe, and security is very much about role-based access control and auditing. Is that still very much going on today? And have we seen a convergence between audit and security?
Yeah, auditors are definitely a good ally of security when they need to define what are the controls, what is the risk tolerance of the organization. In the ERP scenario, which is heavily audited, we see a lot of conversions between IT security and audit, a lot of automation to be able to really achieve true security. Security on ERP applications used to be regarded as a synonym of like role-based access control, authorizations, user profiles, whereas now we see auditors moving more towards really a true understanding of security, where they measure security configurations, patches, authorizations, and really understand all the technology risks that are out there, not just only focusing on users and authorizations.
That's awesome. And when is your talk, Jim?
It's today, I think around 4:30. So.
Awesome. Well, best of luck. Thank you very much. It was nice catching up with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here.
And we're here at RSA Conference 2019. I'm sitting with Rich Gardner. He's the Principal Security Architect for XM Cyber. Rich, welcome.
Hey, Paul. How are you? Nice to see you.
It's good to see you. It's nice to meet you. And I'm excited to talk about the pen testing versus red teaming versus purple teaming and versus how you automate that in your products, which for our listeners I've seen and I really, really like. So.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Watch your show a lot. Get a lot of good information out of you guys. Thank you. And definitely love to promote you guys. So I do that every time I get a chance.
Thank you.
Yeah, so depending on who you talk to, this seems to be an issue, the pen testing versus red teaming, and just that general understanding of the differentiators, when to do it, when not to do it, who's doing it, things of that nature, really become an area where folks need to look at, am I testing from the outside in? All right, so if you're testing, in my opinion, okay, and that's going to vary, but in my opinion, if you're testing from the outside in, that's going to be a pen test. That's going to be somebody that you're going to hire to say, listen, either A, based on the engagement, you could say, I only want to give you my name, my company name. You go and find out everything else.
Right.
I'm going to give you a limited scope. Just attack this piece. So that becomes very concise or very wide, depending on the scope of the engagement.
And a lot of communication has to happen there too to make sure if I'm the tester, I'm actually testing your assets and not someone else who I don't have permission to test.
Exactly.
Right?
You know, and you also have a lot of no-fault documentation floating back and forth, you know, because some of the stuff that pen testers do, I mean, I've done a little bit of it. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination that offensive guy. I'm more of a defensive guy. But, you know, I've looked at it. I've knocked over switches and routers, you know.
Oh, yeah. Everyone has.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not fun.
It's not. It's not.
So red teamers, I think, and I've talked to a lot of them as of most recently, where they're doing the internal pen test. They're the folks that understand the assets. They understand the business. They understand the criticality of the crown jewels. So a lot of red teamers will look at certain areas of their business and go, Again, it could be based on scope or what sort of information they're getting from their management team. But if they're going to look at their different scopes and go, I need to go from point A to point B, and I need to see if this is where it goes into purple teaming, I need to see if my security operations center is seeing me actually do this.
Right. And I think that kind of dovetails into adversary simulation, right?
Yeah.
And whether you have a product and or a person doing, or a team of people doing that, I think there's value in both, certainly, but that's almost like a different level where you're going to have a product, which I really liked, being able to do that and putting that in the hands of different people, but also have an external team to say, yeah, we're going to try and persist in a specific manner with a specific goal in mind, like you said, understanding the assets and the business impact. What effort would it take and how long could I persist without being detected in that engagement?
Well, and that's I think the BAS category, the breach and attack simulation category, really no pun intended, but attacks that issue.
Sure.
Right? So with XM, we give red teamers that force multiplier, right? My partner in anti-crime, Steve, he coined that phrase, and I'm stealing it. But that force multiplier, in my opinion, is elevating and getting the red teamers more visibility, more consistent visibility, that constant testing. Now, we're not there to take the place of a red team. We're not there to take the place of a person. We're helping them elevate their game by constantly testing, as I mentioned, but also it gives them the ability to focus more on higher level techniques, right? More of the tradecraft that they need to spend time with to really get the security level and that security maturity model up further, and dig into that purple teaming, dig into how the security operations center is responding to what's happening.
It's interesting, Rich, when you say that. It makes me think of the kind of unscientific data study that I've done to say that internal red teams are so oversubscribed that they can't possibly test anywhere close to all of the assets in the environment.
No.
Right? I've heard that from pen testers. I've heard that from the vendor community that's working in this space. And so you're not yet, like, that's true, right? Like, they're just oversubscribed. And they need a tool like this to automate, have this test running all the time so that I can go focus on the really, really fun stuff, the really, really cool stuff, and the stuff that's really impactful to the business that requires a human to spend time on that and go do that, right?
Absolutely.
And now I've got this thing that's running, and it's telling me and on the other defenders where our deficiencies are so that we can fix them. I mean, that's the approach today that I think every enterprise needs to adopt, right?
I couldn't agree more. There's another gentleman who Ed Amoroso. I don't know if you know Ed.
I don't know.
But anyway, he was a former CISO of AT&T, and he flat out said it just doesn't make sense that a business shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
You know, and
I don't think we had the tools, and it's reminded of the open source and its Metasploit, and then they released this feature called Autopwn. I don't know if you remember that. And the early versions were really rough around the edges. Yeah. But it started me thinking about that concept, like, what if I could do that all the time? And now I fast forward to today, and when I see solutions such as yours, that I'm like, wow, I wish I had that 15 years ago when I was a practitioner at this particular place, right? And that's the evolution.
You're taking the words right out of my mouth, honestly, because so I told you I like playing the defensive side, right? I like doing that with jiu-jitsu, which I'm a big jiu-jitsu nut, but I play defense to wait and see what happens, and then I launch into that offensive. So I'm very familiar, and I do a lot of reading and research around the offensive side. And build my defensive, my security architectures around that. I can't even begin to tell you how many times I have said to people, you build a security architecture. How do you know that it's secure? You need to test it. And are you going to be able to test that all over the place and consistently? You don't know. For example, the most common thing that we see is normal operation. I open up an SSH putty to one of my Linux boxes in AWS, right? Well, if I own your box, I just got your key, your
riding right on your credentials,
yep,
right?
All your credentials right there. Now that's normal operation. What security tool is going to pick that up?
Right.
Okay, RDP keyboard sniffs, things of that nature. These are normal operations, and a lot of folks go back and say, listen, we deploy, and cloud is the big thing, right? Where we deploy everything by code. Nobody logs into our systems. Come on.
Right. Yeah.
If you're a developer and you don't see something working,
right,
you're going to be like, okay.
I think across the board, the whole attitude that many have towards testing is somewhat, lackluster and requires more experience. So, for example, I built a new firewall architecture, right? Multiple internets, multiple firewalls, multiple switches. And, working with my intern, he's like, it's great. Like, we built it. It's good. We can go on to the next thing. Like, no, we can't.
Got to test it.
We got to test it. And we have to test every scenario. And I think, networking and systems people are better about testing that functionality. But yet when it comes to security, they're like, oh, no, we can't test that all the time. And I'm like, why not? It's just another really level of your quality assurance testing to make sure it works, to make sure it's secure, reliable, and it has integrity, right? That's all part of a testing suite that we've seen in DevSecOps,
right?
But that's got to translate to sysadmins and network operations too, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And it's, throwing a lot of shout outs there. A good friend of mine who works for an insurance company, I won't mention who, but I give him major kudos because he's actually doing that. He's building the purple team. He's we're talking to him about, testing our stuff. But at the end of the day, that's what we're there for. We're there to help organizations build those purple teams because we're giving that continual testing. We're giving you the remediation report. So a lot of red teamers, and I heard this yesterday at B-Sides, red teamers were coming up and they're like, oh, cool, so you do automated simulated red teaming. And then as soon as I mentioned the remediation to shut down those campaigns, they were like, oh, that's really cool because I stop at, consider sucking less, and you guys now add that extra thing that we don't have to do. And I'm like, exactly. So we're helping.
I feel like it operationalizes the attack and remediation process, which it was sorely lacking before we had vendors such as yourselves giving us these solutions, right? Because I was a pen tester. I'd issue a report. They'd look at the report and go, okay, that's great. We'll work on that stuff. And then we'd re-engage the next year. We wouldn't really talk much for that year. I go back and I'm like, you guys really haven't fixed anything.
Sure.
And all my pen test friends today say the same thing. Then when we started seeing the attack and simulation, I'm like, this is a way to operationalize that. So we're constantly purple teaming. We're constantly testing, remediating, testing. I think it's a much better approach. I think it's very similar to Agile and DevOps, right? But now we're translating it into a network, which was so important to raise that bar for our security in our organizations today.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the speed of DevOps, with the speed of Agile.
Having seen your product, very easy to deploy.
Absolutely.
Very easy to get in there, have it report on what's wrong, report that to the right people, and continually run that test and be persistent, right? I mean, that's kind of I think one of differentiators is the software can live on these systems and continually test to identify gaps and threats.
So when I first interviewed for the organization, I was coming from, and you can see it on my LinkedIn, but I was coming from a cloud agent environment, and so I was very sensitive to the sensors that are being deployed and what sort of impact they would have on the systems, on production, things of that nature. This is one of the first products, as early as they've come out of stealth, that built in metrics for CPU, for endpoint resource utilization, where we're giving you that information. Now, if you dive down into it, we work
with another vendor, it's the same kind of telemetry, and I think it's a fantastic trend.
You have to. You have to, because so many people are gun shy to sensors, and they go, oh, it's just another agent. Well, okay, so let's kind of differentiate between agent and sensor, right? And I like to differentiate that. An agent typically has a user interface, is typically configurable.
Right.
Our sensors,
no one should see it on the end.
There's no user interface.
Right.
It's a service that's running. It runs in user mode, so we're not running at that deep kernel mode. So we also have guardrails built around it, which that's another huge aspect. A lot of people don't think about that when they're looking at endpoint solutions. They just automatically jump back because they've had so many times that they've been burnt with them. But we thought about that. We said, okay, we're going to put in guardrails. So if the CPU goes beyond like 5, 10, 15%, it's going to shut down. We're going to restart because we all know things get wonky with Windows, right?
Right.
So we want to make sure that we're not impacting the user. We're not impacting that production application. So we keep those guardrails there. If it shuts down too many times, it just goes offline. It's still, we still see that in the console. You're still able to address it. The sensor management is also done right from ours, so you can actually deploy sensors from our management console, which is new since I think you looked at it. And also you can kill it, you can disable it, you can uninstall it. There's so many different things that you could do, and that's a wonderful aspect of getting over that fear of deploying sensors.
Right. Awesome. Rich, thank you so much.
No, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate it. And again, I think you got a great show.
Thank you.
And good luck here at RSA. I hope you have a great time.
Thank you. Make sure you check out XM Cyber if you're here at RSA, or after the show if you're watching this. It's a great product. I really like it. So
thanks, Paul.
Thank you.